Not much movement in Bitcoin again. We're still where we've been for the last 59 days or whatever it is. But we do have a big emergency in China. Massive emergency in China. And we need to pay attention to what's happening in China, because this morning, China published their economic data. And the economic data was way worse than analysts expected. It's an actual emergency. And we need to look at what this emergency actually means. Because I know you think that if it's in China, well, it's in China, we don't see it, therefore it doesn't affect us. But remember that China is one of the biggest trading partners to the US. A lot of Chinese people use things like iPhones and Nike shoes and whatever else. And they export a lot of US goods. And a collapse in China could take down the US economy. And that's what we're going to look at today. But there is one thing that the Chinese government can actually do to save their economy. And that one thing that the Chinese government can do to save their economy may actually be good for Bitcoin, because that would mean stimulus and adding liquidity. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And also talking about liquidity, you know, we've been talking about Bitcoin being a function of global liquidity. And even though the US has been tightening on global liquidity, we always said that Japan would come to the market and save us, right? And that's what they've been doing for the last couple of months, because Japan's been stimulating their economy by putting money into the economy. And that's what has kept Bitcoin alive. All that may actually be about to end. And I'm going to show you what happened today in Japan that may actually end the Japanese putting more money into the economy and propping up the prices of risk assets. And then, I mean, I guess if you're in the US, this is the Bitcoin chart that you look at, and you may say to yourself, well, we're so far away from an all-time high and this price action is so boring. And you know, to be honest, I agree with you. But if you're living in Argentina, it's a different story, because if you're living in Argentina, actually Bitcoin is hitting all-time highs. And that's not because Bitcoin is doing very well, but it's because the Argentinian currency is collapsing. And we're going to talk about what's happening in Argentina and why this is happening, and why this is so important that we pay attention to what's happening in Argentina if we are in Bitcoin. Then I think we need to talk about other international things. So next week here in South Africa, there's this thing called the BRICS Summit. Now, you know BRICS. BRICS is Brazil, India, China, South Africa, and they are, you could say, against the dollar. Well, they're meeting here for the big BRICS Summit next week. And one of the things on the agenda at the BRICS Summit next week is actually the establishment of a common payment system. It says, while a technical committee is likely to be formed to start considering a potential joint currency. And if that happens, you know what's going to happen to the dollar. And then lastly, what I think we should talk about today is we should talk about Michael Burry's second big short. So this guy, Michael Burry, for those of you who don't know, he is the guy from the Big Short. He made his money short in the real estate market, in the housing market collapse in 2008, I think it was. And now he is max short on the market. He's a couple of $1 billion short on the market. So we've got to talk about what he's seeing and whether what he's seeing is going to be good or bad for Bitcoin. So look, not much is happening in Bitcoin, but there is a lot happening on the markets. And today I think we need to go global. We need to go look international. We need to identify, we need to break down specifically what's happening in China and how that can impact the rest of the world. So big show, lots to do today and not much time. Let's do this. Look, I say not much time because I am actually flying as soon as I'm finished the show, but don't worry, I will be back here tomorrow, so nothing to worry about, There's a lot happening today. We're going to get through a lot of stuff in the show. We are going to talk about altcoins. There are a lot of altcoins. We are going to talk about Michael Burry short. We are going to talk about the situation in China. We are going to talk about the situation in Japan. We're going to talk about the situation in Argentina. We're going to talk about the BRICS countries. We're going to talk about Sam Bankman-Fried in jail. We're going to talk about news on Rollbit. We're going to talk about news on RUNE. We're going to talk about a whole lot of other news. So listen, there's a lot to talk about. So welcome. If you are new to the channel, you know what to do. Break that subscribe button now and break that like button, because of all the shows that could have been shadow banned, whose show was shadow banned yesterday? Mine. Why? Because I keep talking against the establishment and I need your help. Just some quick stuff that I think we should maybe talk about. We spoke yesterday about the launch of 𝗧𝗍. Remember, 𝗧𝗍 is this new layer 1 protocol that is built for trading. We said that I think it would open under 35 cents. If I look at what 𝗧𝗍 is doing on Bybit, it's about 19 cents, so no real action there. Also today, I think it's a good thing that we're talking about international politics today, because Actually, today is a very, very, very big day in Bitcoin. I know you wouldn't say it's a big day in Bitcoin when you look at the chart, but today something happened many years ago on the same day as today, and it is the reason why Bitcoin probably exists. What happened was 52 years ago, Richard Nixon suspended the convertibility of US dollars into gold. So up until that point, you could convert your US dollars back into gold, because remember, US dollars were actually backed by gold. And on this day, Richard Nixon actually abolished the convertibility of US dollars back into gold. And ever since then, money hasn't been, or US dollars haven't been backed by gold. And that was a big turning point. So I think it's quite fitting that today we talk about international politics and international currency devaluation. And ultimately, we're going to talk about dollar devaluation today, because I think that's the big order of the day. And that's where it's all pointing to. Just lastly, before we get into all the alpha, I don't know if you guys saw this new feature in the Banter Bubbles. So we have a new button here. It's called the Newsroom. This Newsroom is where we have our call every single day, where we decide the content of the news. Now, it's limited to 500 people. The next call you can see is in 17 hours and 46 minutes, but go to the Newsroom, add it to your calendar, and be there tomorrow. There were 500 people on the call today. It was actually quite a lot of fun to actually speak about, to actually have the community listening to the inside of Banter and how we create shows and all the researchers. There were 44 researchers on that call, and Banter Girl was one of them. So was one of them. Let's quickly look at before we get into the main story, let's quickly look at the bubbles. Let's look at where we're at. So RUNE continues its run, 153. We must talk about that later in the show today. 𝗕𝗏𝗃, this position liquidated me yesterday. So it brought me back to, I'm 141st in the Baba trading competition. My P&L is 14.84%. I'm still long on GMX. So that's what's going on there. Let's just quickly jump into the 1 hour to see if there's any sudden movements in this market. Okay, so you can see in the last hour, Rollbit's gone up, and we're going to talk about Rollbit and why it's gone up in the last hour. What else? In the last hour, it looks like the market's slightly better. Anyway, let's get into the big story of the day. And the big story of the day comes out of China. So why is it such a big story? Because China is the second biggest economy in the world, and China published their economic numbers this morning. And let me tell you, they were so disappointing that none of the analysts predicted what came out of China this morning. In fact, only one analyst predicted what the Chinese government actually did. So what we need to look at is we need to look at why these numbers are so disappointing and what it actually means for the rest of the world. Can it impact you? Because if you're watching this video, you're probably not in China. Because if you were in China, this video would be banned. In fact, we should get these videos in China, in Chinese, but onto their version of YouTube. So let's talk about what actually happened in China this morning and why everybody is in such a panic and why we decided to go and say, look, there's actually an emergency happening in China. There is an emergency happening in China. So what actually happened? Well, the Chinese government published data, economic data. Now, very, very, very important that you understand. We don't believe economic data from China. The Chinese government is known for manipulating economic data in their favor. So the data that you're about to see is the data once it has already probably been manipulated in favor of the Chinese government. And even after that, it looks horrendous. It looks so bad that none of the analysts that cover China could predict what happened, and only one predicted what the Chinese government actually landed up doing. So let's look at the numbers and understand why the numbers are so bad. So I'm not going to speak about unemployment yet. We will speak about unemployment in a second. The first thing is they published their industrial production, okay? So why is that important? Because you want to see what China is actually producing. The numbers came out at a 3.7% growth, and the forecast was 4.4% growth, which means that the Chinese production is slowing down a lot. The next number, which shocked the market, was the fixed asset investment, and it was the worst reading ever outside of the COVID pandemic. So why is this such an important number? Because this shows how much money people in China are investing in fixed assets. It says here, in China, urban investment in fixed assets is one of the main measures of capital spending. It refers to investment in construction projects with a total planned investment of 5 million yuan, machinery and equipment, and real estate development in both urban and rural. It refers to investment made by state-owned enterprises and private individuals, institutions, and investors. So basically, what this is showing, and the number came in at 3.4% versus a consensus or a forecast of 3.8%, it shows that people are not investing in assets in China. Then we got the Chinese retail sales, and the Chinese retail sales came in worse than ever. Okay, the worst ever read in the country's history, outside the reverberations of COVID. Okay, so it shows that people came out with an actual a growth in sales of 2.5% versus a 4.5% consensus. So these are all really, really, really big misses here. Now, I want to actually show this to you so that you can understand the trends. This is the Chinese industrial production. You can see the Chinese industrial production is dropping. The next thing I want to show you is the Chinese investment in fixed assets. Just look at how fast the Chinese investment in fixed assets is growing. It means that people don't have money in China. The next one is the Chinese retail sales. You can see that the Chinese retail sales are dropping. Look at how fast the retail sales were growing, and look at how fast these retail sales are going up now. Lastly. In fact, before we talk about that, you may be looking at this data and you may be saying, hold on a second, you've just shown me a whole lot of data. And in every single one of these data points, you're showing me that China continues to grow, but China continues to grow at a slower rate than the expectations. You're right, it's true. The problem is that the market has become so used to China growing at a very, very, very fast rate that now the market is getting disappointed when the Chinese economy cannot continue to grow at this fast rate. And you know that economic data is all about the reality versus the expectations. So yes, China is growing. And yes, China is growing way faster than the United States. The problem is it's growing way slower than the expectations. And China is a powerhouse, okay? Not only is China the biggest manufacturing country in the world, but also Chinese consumers are some of the biggest consumers in the world. And if you think that you're insulated because it's, hey, this is the Chinese economy, why should you worry about the Chinese economy? You're based in the United States. Well, let me let you in a little secret. Chinese consumers are some of the biggest consumers of United States goods. Think about the iPhone, think about Nike shoes, think about Tesla cars, think about all these things that are manufactured in the United States or primarily manufactured by US companies. And now the Chinese consumers won't be able to afford them because of the slowdown in the Chinese economy. So all of this data was super disappointing, but the data point that hit the hardest, I think, is that the Chinese inflation rate is actually negative, which means that the Chinese economy is actually now shrinking. The inflation is actually now shrinking, which means that prices are going down. This is deflation. The Chinese economy is now deflating. Okay, so you'd say to yourself, well, deflation is a good thing, right? Prices are coming down. No. The reason why this is not a good thing is because if you look at the Chinese currency, and here is a picture of the Chinese currency, you can see that the Chinese currency has devalued against the US dollar by over 10%. And even with this devaluation, we're still getting no inflation. And that is a big problem because when you devalue a currency, what you want to see is you want to see inflation. And even with this devaluation, you're seeing that the Chinese market or the Chinese inflation is actually deflating. China is actually deflating. Why all the alarm bells? So let's look at why this actually happened. This is happening because the Chinese economy is grinding to a halt. The Chinese unemployment rate is shooting up. And in fact, it's shooting up so high that they made a decision to stop disclosing certain unemployment data. And that is after disclosed that the Chinese youth jobless rate rose to 21.3%. What this is saying is that the Chinese economy has slowed down to such an extent that the youth, the power of any economy, has an unemployment rate of 21.3%. And to make things worse, they're going to stop reporting it. This is what, I've got to actually show you this. I watched this video today. It's about 2 minutes. We'll watch certain parts of it. This blows my mind. You tell me what you think.
Guess what the young are doing in China? They're quitting full-time jobs to become full-time children. It's a trend we spoke about earlier, and now for many Chinese youngsters, it's becoming a way of life. They're walking away from illustrious careers. They're saying no thank you to the glamour of big fat paychecks. They're throwing away years of expensive education to do what? To become full-time children. They're choosing to stay at home, wash dishes, run errands, and most importantly, take care of their parents. Well, most of us in India do that already, but we don't have to quit our jobs as a bargain. The young in China are battling a dual crisis. On one hand, a dismal job market is pouring cold water all over their dreams. On the other hand, the Chinese youth is burnt out. They would rather go back to the comforts of home than work long hours in the office. They would rather rely on their parents' money to get by than chase big salaries
There's a part here about
themselves.
graduates, which I want you guys to watch.
Yesterday, we told you how bad the unemployment crisis was. More than 1 in 5 in the 16 to 24 age group are jobless in China. Their dreams and desires have been dumped. This cohort of full-time children has reasons to return to the comforts of home. China's poor work-life...
I want to fast forward just to see if we can find the part about here, about the graduation. So
some are so defeated that they're failing their exams on purpose, just so that they can delay graduation. In fact, Chinese social media was flooded with images of graduates lying flat in their gowns. If this isn't a clear sign of how bad things are in China, I don't know what is.
So you're in a situation now where there's a huge unemployment number. There is a number, I'll try and read it to you, but it's a fake number because you know what the story is here. 5.3%, 20% of the Chinese youth, which are the power of any economy, are now completely unemployed, trying not to graduate. I mean, you saw all of those things. So that is how bad the Chinese economy is. And I want to just read you a couple of things here. So the first thing is what 𝗕𝗬𝗕𝗏 says. 𝗕𝗬𝗕𝗏 says, China is actually exporting deflation in a more profound way than I believe many economists and strategists appreciate. All else equal, the 15% depreciation in the yuan relative to the dollar in the last year should have increased inflation. Instead, inflation has dropped. What this means is that even with a decrease in the currency of 15%, which makes things 15%, should make things 15% more expensive, inflation has actually dropped, which means there is zero demand. And the reason why there is zero demand is because the economy is almost at a standstill. People don't have jobs. When people don't have jobs, and the economy is so slow, they don't consume. And that is pushing prices down. And that's causing a situation in China, which is crazy. So Gareth says, he says, China, the second largest economy in the world, is in trouble. Retail sales, industrial production, fixed asset. He says, remember, when China reports numbers, economists assume they are far worse than they actually reported. So things are not good in China. He says the post-COVID spending spree in China has fallen flat. Unemployment remains high, unlike the tight labor market in the United States, which is the exact opposite. He says, for example, the biggest trading partner for the US is now Mexico. With deflation, the Chinese government will start printing heavily again. Being the second largest economy in the world, this is worth noting. Okay, so let's talk about what the Chinese government actually did and what they can continue to do. So the first thing that the Chinese government actually did was they decreased their interest rate. So they went and they started cutting interest rates. Here it is. China's central bank cut its interest rate today. Okay, now this is the one analyst who said it would actually happen. The cut was not expected by the market. Only one analyst predicted this cut. This cut brings the rate down to 2.5%. This is the important part. This is the second rate cut since June and the biggest rate cut since 2020. The problem with the June rate cut is that the June rate cut had no impact. China wants to prop up its economy, but the problem is that they're cutting rates and their rate cuts have no impact. So what are they going to do? Well, I think what she says in point number 5 is the key point here. China is going to need to introduce countrywide stimulus. This is the key point. If your economy, if the Chinese economy is flat and when they cut rates, nothing happens. It's almost like that piece of ammunition that they've got, cut rates to stimulate the economy, isn't working. What do? Well, you're then going to put stimulus into the economy. So we could be in a situation where the Chinese government is forced to do stimulus again. Now, up until the time that they do that, she says, watch stocks exposed to China. Don't forget Tesla makes 22% of its revenue from China. Apple makes 19% of its revenue from China. And Nike makes 14% of its revenue from China. Watch mining companies who make the majority of their large chunk revenue from China. So it has a cascading effect on the rest of the world. And what we think, or what we hope the Chinese government will do here, is actually do some kind of stimulus to save this. Because if not, it looks like there is an emergency in China, and usually the numbers that are reported from China are much more biased to the upside, to the positive side. And so you need to know that the situation in China is much worse than reported. And probably the only thing that they can do is actually do stimulus. And if we do stimulus, that could mean more liquidity, like almost like the COVID pump. So we've got to watch the situation, because remember, for us, Bitcoin is a function of global liquidity. The more liquidity in the system, the higher the price of Bitcoin. We've spoken about that. In fact, if you look at the sources of liquidity, Japan and China have been the sources of liquidity this year, while the US has actually been taking money out of the economy. So that is what we've got to look out for. We've got to look out for China and what happens next. If China start collapsing and they need to start funding their collapse, remember that China are also the second biggest holders of US T-bills. And one thing that they'll surely do is actually dump their US T-bills to prop up their own economy. So we've got to look out for all the different implications that can be there. The best case scenario is we get some kind of urgent stimulus, which brings stability and liquidity into the market. But we've got to watch out, because a collapse in China could actually create a collapse in the rest of the world. And maybe that's why Michael Burry is looking at this and saying, you know what? He's actually confident enough to say that the Nasdaq is at all-time highs. The S&P, well, almost at all-time highs. The S&P is almost all-time highs. He's probably looking at this international situation and saying, there's problems in China. Our market is drunk. The US market is drunk and not responding to the lack of liquidity. And that's why he's taken a massive short position. Not really a short position, it's puts. The notional size of his puts are $750 million against the Nasdaq and $900 million against the SPY, the S&P 500. So $1.6 billion position in shorts. So he's taking another bet against the US markets. He's saying that a big collapse is coming soon. Now, you remember what made him famous was when he made these predictions in the 2008 housing collapse. He was the one guy that predicted the housing collapse. And you can see it in the movie called The Big Short. Well, Michael Burry is the guy from The Big Short. So go and watch the movie. So maybe he's looking at this China situation and saying, look, this can easily cascade into the US. And if it does, and you're talking about Nike, 14% of its revenue from China, Tesla, 22%, Apple, these are just three companies that I mentioned, but many more companies in the United States and in Europe and in Africa. All the mining, who do you think consumes all the mining? It's the Chinese. They need all the raw materials. If the manufacturing is down, it means the mining companies are going to be down. So we need China to survive this. We need stimulus in China for many reasons. Because if we get the stimulus in China, we then get the Bitcoin price going up. We need China to survive this. We cannot afford a collapse in China. And I don't think that the Chinese government want the collapse. So I think that they may be forced to do stimulus very soon. So we're going to keep our eyes on that. Let me know what you think. Let me know if it scares you. Let me know. I mean, for me, when I saw this today, I was like, why are the markets not responding? How is Bitcoin not responding? Give us a sign of life. Give us a respond downwards if you think that China is going to collapse, and respond upwards if you think that there's going to be liquidity. But I guess Bitcoin's not really going to move. There are other tokens which are moving, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Let's move from China to Japan, because very similar in nature. We do have Japan. Remember, we spoke about Japan. We did a whole show about Japan, and we spoke about how important Japan was and the problem that the Japanese economy is in. Remember, we said that the Japanese economy, because they've been putting so much liquidity into the economy, they are now starting to get inflation. And the problem with inflation is Japan has never had inflation, and Japan has never had interest, or hasn't had interest. Now, something happened this morning in Japan as well, and again, it could be bad for Bitcoin, and I want to show you what happened in Japan. So it's very important that you understand exactly what happened in Japan. So in Japan, we got the GDP numbers for Japan. And you'll look at the GDP numbers. The Japanese economy grew at an annualized rate of 6% versus a forecast of 3.1%. So the Japanese economy is actually firing on all cylinders. In fact, right now, if the Japanese, if they were predicting a growth rate of 3.7% and they got 6%, the Japanese economy is performing much better than expected. Why is it performing much better than expected? Well, a couple of reasons. The first reason is because of the devaluation of the Japanese currency. So because the currency has been devalued against the dollar, it makes exports cheaper, right? So if you devalue your currency, you can use the same amount of dollars to buy more of your goods. And Japan has got a massive export economy. They manufacture cars, they manufacture a whole lot of other things, a massive export economy. So one reason why the Japanese economy performed so well is because of exports. The other reason why the Japanese economy performed so well is because of tourism. Many people are coming to Japan. Actually, I watched an amazing documentary on Netflix. I don't know if it's a documentary, it's actually a show. It's called Drops of God. You should actually watch it. It's about the wine industry in Japan. It'll really make you want to go and visit Japan. So go and check it out. It's called Drops of God. I think it's on Apple TV. It's not on Netflix. So the Japanese economy is now performing much better than expected. Okay, so what's the problem here? I'll tell you what the problem is. The problem is that the reason why the Japanese economy is performing so well is because the currency has been devaluing and because the government has been putting so much stimulus into the market. So the government has funded the market with Japanese yen, and the problem with that is that now they're going to start getting a lot of inflation, and they can't afford the inflation. So what's going to happen? They're going to have to butt in, and they're going to have to increase interest rates. That is the only way that Japan can stop the rampant inflation in Japan, is to increase interest rates and to start tightening their economy. Here is the problem. The problem is that Japan has been the source of liquidity for the global markets. While the US was tightening, while Europe was tightening, Japan was the one putting liquidity into the market. The problem is that now Japan is stopping putting the liquidity into the market. Why? Because their numbers are so good. They are the opposite in China. They're growing very, very fast. Their employment numbers are much higher than their employment numbers are much better. So they're growing very, very fast. It's the exact opposite of Japan. So TED Talk Macro actually says this right. It said, Japan have kept global liquidity afloat. We've been covering this for a long time. While most major central banks tightened in the past 18 months to calm inflation, the Bank of Japan has maintained an easy policy in the process. Brought inflation back to Japan after years of deflation. With the hot GDP print today, you can bet that the Bank of Japan will have to pull back its liquidity efforts and tighten up later this year, which means that there's going to be a global liquidity vacuum. Bad for markets. Okay, this is really, really, really bad for risk markets and Bitcoin. And I actually read a tweet where someone said, BOJ actions in the coming months is possibly the most underappreciated risk in the global macroeconomy. We had a show last week with Michael 𝗕𝗬𝗕𝗏. How do you pronounce his name? Michael 𝗕𝗬𝗕, I think is how you pronounce it. And he said the same thing. He said, the biggest risk to financial markets now is the tightening in Japan. And remember again, Japan is the biggest holder of US treasuries. They may be forced to sell these treasuries, flooding the market with US treasuries and actually destabilizing the market. So we need to pay attention to that. We need to pay attention to what's happening in Japan. On the one hand, you've got China potentially collapsing or increasing liquidity through stimulus. On the other hand, you've got Japan probably going to need to tighten their economy, and they've been the source of global liquidity. You need to pay attention to that because that is a risk that could be there on the horizon. And specifically, if you're holding crypto and Bitcoin, we know that crypto and Bitcoin are a function of global liquidity, and they respond to global liquidity. So you've got trouble in the East. You've got trouble in China, trouble in Japan. Maybe the trouble in China will lead to liquidity. Someone says stay caution. Someone says run his Wikipedia. I've got a good research team. You can actually join the calls in the morning. You can actually hear how we came up with all of this. Those that were in the call this morning, maybe just leave us a comment and tell us how you think the call translated actually into the show. And again, if you want that, just go to the newsroom on Banter Bubbles. All right, let's go to the next country, because today it's all about international countries. Like, we're not spending any time in the US, because when you look at Bitcoin against the US dollar, it's basically hasn't moved for 45 days. But if you live in Argentina, that is not your reality, right? Because if you live in Argentina, today, Bitcoin has actually hit an all-time high. Now, it's not a good thing. It's not because Bitcoin is moving. The reason why Bitcoin hit an all-time high today is because of the devaluation of the Argentinian peso. So you can see that if you take the Argentinian peso from, let's take it from January. I mean, you can see it's been a terrible road for the Argentinian peso, but let's just take from January, because I think let's just start this year, because it's like a time horizon that we can understand. So it's depreciated over 100% this year. And what happened in Japan is that you now have a well, I don't know if he's pro-Bitcoin, if he understands Bitcoin. He understands Bitcoin, and I think he's pro-Bitcoin. His name is 𝗕𝗬𝗕𝗏𝗧, and he won the primary presidential election in Argentina. It was a shock. No one tipped this guy to win the primary presidential election in Argentina. He's a huge libertarian. I mean, I saw a video with this guy. Let me see if I can find the video here. I must have it for you guys. Yeah, this is him hitting a piñata of the central bank on TV. So he wants to destroy the central bank. He's a presidential candidate. Can you imagine Joe Biden doing this? He'd probably fall asleep. Can you imagine Joe Biden doing this? You know who would actually do something like this? Trump would actually do something like this. I could see Trump doing something like this, but not Biden. Anyway, so as I said, surprise result, 𝗕𝗬𝗕𝗏𝗧 took the lead in the Argentinian primary presidential election. The actual general election is in October, but no one expected this guy to win. And because of this surprise win, what you're seeing is that the Argentinian peso has completely collapsed, because this guy said publicly that he wants to abolish the central bank and he wants to dollarize the Argentinian peso, but he's also a pro-Bitcoin guy. So I'll show you the pro-Bitcoin stuff that everyone's talking about. So let me just get you timestamps. Otherwise, we're going to be watching lots of videos. So let's look at around 20 seconds. I think I saw something.
Estafan a las personas de bien con el
Okay, so he says,
¿sí? Es un mecanismo por el cual los políticos estafan.
Let's go back.
¿Es posible en Argentina esa discusión?
A ver, ¿cuál es el punto? El punto es que lo primero que
the
hay que
central bank
comprender
is
es
a
que el Banco
scam.
Central es una estafa. ¿Sí?
It's a mechanism by which
por el cual los
politicians
políticos
cheat.
estafan
He gets it
a las personas de bien con
with
el
an
impuesto
inflationary
inflacionario.
tax.
El Bitcoin lo que está representando es la vuelta del dinero a su creador originario, que es el sector privado.
So he says Bitcoin is returning the function of the currency to the private sector, which is, I think, he's very smart. He really understands it.
Dinero es una invención del sector privado para resolver problemas, digamos, de lo que tiene que ver con en una economía de trueque sería la doble coincidencia y la indivisibilidad.
He also talks about inflation. So, I mean, he really gets it. He's a real libertarian. I'll play you one more section there, which I think is worth listening to.
Poder emitir, es que es el curso forzoso, que esta es la clave. ¿Por qué? Porque el curso forzoso es lo que le...
That's the legal tender. The key point, which is legal tenders allow politicians to scam you with inflation. So this guy understands inflation. He understands, he's one of us. This guy's one of us. Now, he wants to abolish the Argentinian peso, and that's why the Argentinian peso collapsed. He wants to dollarize it, but at the same time, he also knows a lot about Bitcoin and crypto. So who knows? Maybe if Argentina get another pro-Bitcoin guy, I don't think he's going to make it the official currency of Argentina, but he certainly understands it. Okay, more international stuff, because today it's all about international stuff. Now, remember we spoke a lot about BRICS. Brazil, India, Russia, China, South Africa, right? So that's the countries that make up BRICS. Now, what is BRICS? It's just a collection of nations that have come together, and they're having a meeting in South Africa next week. I actually might even go to this and bring you guys live coverage from it, because it's not very far from where we live. So, what is it? It is there's a meeting that starts next week, 22nd to 24th of August in South Africa in Sandton. Funny enough, that's actually where I grew up. And some of the things that they're actually going to talk about at this meeting is, so who's attending? Everyone's attending except the Russian Prime Minister. Vladimir Putin will not attend because there's an arrest warrant issued for him. And if he comes here, they're going to have to arrest him. So he's not going to be here. But some of the things that they're going to discuss is establishing a common payment system for the BRICS nations. Now, you'll know that the BRICS nations have come out against the US dollar for a long time. So now they're having this summit. And on the background of the summit, India went and completed their first crude oil payment to the UAE in rupees, officially ditching the US dollar for bilateral trade. Another thing which they're going to be discussing at this BRICS summit is a whole list of countries that actually want to join BRICS. Okay, so what are the key issues that are being discussed? Is the expansion by adding new members, including admission criteria, because there are a lot of countries that want to come into BRICS, and some of the countries in here, like Brazil, wants to keep it a very small group, but a lot of the countries that want to come into BRICS, 23 countries have formally applied to become new BRICS members, including Saudi Arabia, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Argentina, Indonesia, Egypt, Ethiopia, and a whole lot of other countries, very strong in resource countries. Now, they are talking about moving to their own currency. Sometimes they spoke about a gold-backed currency. They spoke about an asset-backed currency. That's part of the thing that they're going to discuss next week at the summit. But the important part that you need to understand is that you need to understand they're meeting here and that they're doing this, and if they do, whatever comes out of it, it could weaken the dollar. So someone says your BRICS expansion could lead to a 90% of oil sales no longer being settled in US dollars. Because remember, Russia is part of BRICS and Russia's got the sanctions and whatever else. Should Saudi Arabia gain entry to BRICS, and that's one of the things that they're discussing next week, the subsequent shift away from the greenback could fast-track de-dollarization with notable ramifications for Washington. So this is something that we should keep our eyes open for. I may even fly there and just bring you live coverage because it's not very far from here. In fact, that's where I'm flying to today. All right, what else is there? Let's talk about, we spoke about Michael Burry's short position. We talk about altcoins. You probably need to pay attention to this. I just want to make sure that it's refreshed. So remember we spoke about RUNE yesterday, and we spoke about how the price is actually flying, and it is flying. This we can just check the price of RUNE. Delete the price of Bitcoin because the price of Bitcoin is not moving. You can see it over here. So RUNE is now at 151.30. It has had a huge pump. Very important that you understand what's going on here with the pump. First thing is, this here is the aggregated open interest. In other words, the open positions, leverage positions. You can see there are huge, 9 times what the leverage positions have been. It's increased by 9-fold, and it's increased to the shorts because the funding rate has gone completely negative. Now, what could happen here? These guys are all calling for RUNE to go down. Either they're right, or we're going to get a short squeeze and we're going to get another candle up. So I just want to refresh this because I'm just scared that this is not updating live. Let's quickly see. Hopefully it is updating live. Okay, so the open interest is still very, very, very high. And the funding rate, I would imagine, is negative. So let's quickly look at the funding rate. By the way, if you want to do this yourselves, you can easily do it. It's on coinalyze.net. Then you go to ThorChain, and then you just go click aggregated funding rate. Okay, I've done it twice by mistake. Funding rate is very, very, very negative. Look at the funding rate here. It's very negative. This means that a lot of people are short. Either they're right, or there's going to be a massive short squeeze. If there is another short squeeze, then RUNE goes up. Then RUNE goes up for a long time. Saw this yesterday as well. The launch window for Doge 1 lunar mission has been confirmed, 15th to 20th of November. So keep an eye out for Doge when that happens. This is the launch mission for Doge 1. This is the founder of Rollbit, and Twitter accidentally apparently deleted his account. Now, the reason why I'm reporting on this is because you'll remember that these founders are not doxxed. These founders are, because they're running a gambling operation, they may want to clean up and disappear if they thought the authorities were coming for them. So initially, when I saw this, I thought, hold on a second, be careful. This could mean that the founder is making a run for it. But I don't think so, because they actually replied to my tweet and they said Twitter accidentally deleted the founder's account. Now, one thing about Rollbit, a lot of our analysts, including Miles, have actually done the Rollbit numbers, and they think that Rollbit is still undervalued. And I saw this, that has there ever been a coin that is closing in on the top 16 market cap that has never been listed on that hasn't been listed on a tier 1 centralized exchange? So Rollbit is not yet listed on a tier 1 centralized exchange. It's not on Bybit, it's not on anything. So I think that, I mean, I wouldn't be buying it at these levels, but you may want to look at it. Also, because if you look at all the sports season, remember, a lot of their revenue is derived from sports betting, and it's the Rugby World Cup, it's the soccer, the Premier League has started again. All the soccer leagues have started again. The NFL is starting on the 7th of September. So there's a lot happening in terms of sports. So I think from a sports point of view, the Rollbit sports revenue may actually go up. And then you've also got the double whammy that there's no centralized exchanges. We're so close to 1,000 likes, so close. Let's see if you guys can get us to 1,000 likes. Elon and Zuck, the fight. I mean, Elon's crazy. He now wants to send people to Mark Zuckerberg's house, and Mark Zuckerberg's spokesperson said Mark Zuckerberg's traveling right now. He's in Palo Alto. Mark takes the sport seriously and isn't going to fight with someone who randomly shows up at Mark Zuckerberg's house. I mean, I agree. You can't just shock up at his house. Oh, big news. We've got to talk about this. The first European ETF for Bitcoin launches today. It's going live today. Yeah. It is. It's domiciled in Guernsey, actually. So this company is actually domiciled in Guernsey. It's called 𝗥𝗲 Bitcoin ETF. Is overseen by Guernsey Financial Authority, and Fidelity Assets manage its custodial responsibility. So the first Bitcoin ETF is actually going live in Europe. I mean, look, the ETF market is very much a North American market, so don't expect too much. But it's just nice to see that, and you know, Canada's got an ETF, Europe's got an ETF, and a whole lot of other countries have got an ETF. Let's see what else is there. There are a couple of other things. Also, I want to check the news group to see if there's any breaking news while we are here and live and bringing you all this alpha. SEC delays. I'm seeing this. It's probably wrong. I don't trust stuff that comes out of this account. There is an account that says SEC delays all Bitcoin ETF decisions until 2024. Of course they will. I mean, no one's expecting an ETF decision now. Binance seeking an order against the SEC, claiming that they're just doing a fishing expedition. I mean, that's just games that are happening. I also saw this news yesterday. So Trump will have his mugshot taken for election conspiracy. This is what the sheriff of that county says. He says when Trump comes here, he's actually going to get his mugshots. I mean, crazy to think that this is what's happening.
We are following our normal practices, and so it doesn't matter your status. We have mugshots ready for you. We are following.
Yeah, I mean, they really want to arrest Trump, but I think 10 others have also been indicted in the indictment. One of our sponsors, OpenX, they've launched their. So first of all, they've achieved a new 24-hour trade volume all-time high. They're $108 million in. And I remember I said to you, I invested in OpenX or Flex when it was coined. I said to you, I'm not expecting to win a popularity contest, but I do think that these guys are going to shock the world, and it looks like they are shocking the world. So. First of all, they were the first guys to list Rollbit options. Second thing is that they were the first ones to launch Unibot derivatives. Now their 24-hour trade volume's gone up to $108 million per day in 24 hours. And I think I saw an announcement. Let me just check here. I think I saw an announcement that they actually opened up their staking. Let me just open and see if we've got that announcement for you guys. Let's have a look here. Okay, so they've launched their staking dashboard this week. If you hold OX, their token, you can stake it and earn yield and fees generated by the platform. So if you stake OpenX, you can actually start earning yield. So I mean that's pretty cool because I've got a whole lot of OpenX. So maybe we should. I need to look at that. Anything else happening? Let's have a look here. Anything in the newsroom? Not much happening in the newsroom. Quickly, let's just check the markets one more time. I think the best place to check the markets is to check it on the bubbles. So here are the bubbles. Let's quickly just refresh it. In the last hour, Flex starting to come down, Rollbit up 2%, RUNE down 1.9%. Today, if we look at it, Flex up, 𝗕𝗏 up, liquidated me. You know why I got liquidated on 𝗕𝗏? Because I went into a territory of playing a coin that I wasn't used to playing. That's the problem. So I went into like uncharted territory. I didn't understand the ranges for the coin. I just went short because I thought the market's not moving. Shorter the news, and I got liquidated in the middle of the night. So that's the story. Yeah, I will be back here tomorrow. I will be on Twitter Spaces in 9 minutes. I'll hopefully see you guys at both of those. Otherwise, I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Until then, have fun and trade well, my friends.